The Secrets of Dr. Taverner by Dion. Introduction. These narratives may be examined from dual perspectives, and undoubtedly the viewpoint adopted by the reader will be determined by personal inclination and prior acquaintance with the subject under consideration. They may be perceived as works of fiction, designed, much like the discourse of the fat boy depicted in the Pickwick Papers, to evoke a sensation of dread. Alternatively, they may be recognized for what they truly are: studies in obscure dimensions of psychology, cast in the mold of fiction because, were they to be presented as earnest contributions to scientific literature, they would stand no chance of receiving a hearing. One might not unreasonably inquire what motive could prompt anyone to seek an audience for such chronicles as are detailed herein, beyond a justifiable interest in the financial remunerations that typically accrue to those who cater to the public appetite for the macabre. I must, however, entreat my readers to attribute to me a motivation other than the purely commercial. I was among the pioneering students of psychoanalysis in this country, and during my inquiries, I discovered that the ends of several conceptual threads were placed in my hands, only for those threads to vanish into the obscurity surrounding the narrow beacon of light projected by exact scientific knowledge. It was by pursuing these threads into the darkness of the unknown that I encountered the experiences and cases which, adapted into fiction, are recorded within these pages. I do not wish to imply, however, that these occurrences transpired precisely as they are delineated, for such is not the case. Nevertheless, they are entirely grounded in fact, and there is not a single incident herein described that is a product of pure imagination. That is to say, whilst no depiction constitutes a literal photograph, neither is any a purely fanciful sketch. Rather, they are composite portraits, constructed by extracting and assembling countless snapshots of actual events. The collective work, far from being an arbitrary creation of the fancy, represents an earnest inquiry into the psychology of the ultraconscious. I present these studies in supernormal pathology to the general public because my experience has demonstrated that the cases I chronicle here are by no means as rare as might be presumed. Rather, remaining unrecognized, they go unaided. I have personally encountered several instances of the powerhouse, some of which are well known to members of the various circles interested in such phenomena. Bloodlust is literally true, and both narratives, far from being embellished for dramatic effect, have been significantly moderated to render them suitable for publication. Dr. Taverner will undoubtedly be recognized by certain of my readers. His enigmatic sanatorium was a historical reality, and infinitely more extraordinary than any work of fiction could conceive. It is a remarkable circumstance that the portrait of him drawn from imagination by the artist who illustrated these accounts for the Royal Magazine bears a recognizable likeness, notwithstanding that the artist had never viewed a photograph of him, nor received any description. To Dr. Taverner I owe the profoundest debt of my existence. Without Dr. Taverner there would have been no Dion, and to him I offer the tribute of these pages. Dion, London. Chapter 1. Bloodlust. I have never been able to determine whether Dr. Taverner should be regarded as the hero or the villain of these chronicles. That he was motivated by the most altruistic ideals was beyond question, yet in his methods of translating those ideals into practice, he proved utterly unscrupulous. He did not seek to evade the law. He simply ignored its existence. Furthermore, although the exquisite tenderness with which he treated his patients was an education in itself, he would nevertheless employ his remarkable psychological methodology to dismantle a soul, proceeding as quietly, methodically, and benevolently as though his sole intent were the patient's recovery. The circumstances of my introduction to this extraordinary man were quite uncomplicated. Following my discharge from the Royal Army Medical Corps, I repaired to a medical agency to inquire after vacant positions. I remarked, "I have left the service with my nervous system severely shattered. I require some tranquil retreat until I can recover my equilibrium." "So indeed does everyone," observed the clerk. He regarded me thoughtfully. "I wonder whether you might care to consider an establishment that has remained upon our register for some duration. We have dispatched several candidates thither, yet none could be induced to remain." He directed me to one of the arterial streets off Harley Street, and there I made the acquaintance of the man whom, regardless of his moral character, I have ever since esteemed as possessing the most remarkable intellect I have ever encountered. Of lofty stature and slender build, with a countenance resembling parchment, he might have been of any age spanning from 35 to 65. Indeed, I have observed him assume the appearance of either extreme within the span of a single hour. He lost no time in addressing the matter at hand. "I require a medical superintendent for my sanatorium," he informed me. "I understand that you have specialized, to the extent permitted by your military service, in psychological cases. I apprehend that you will find my methods markedly divergent from orthodox practice. Nevertheless, as I occasionally succeed where others fail, I deem myself justified in continuing these investigations, which, I believe, Dr. Rhodes, is the utmost any of our colleagues can legitimately claim to do." The gentleman's cynical demeanor vexed me, though I could not dispute that psychiatric therapy does not, at present, constitute an exact science. As though responding to my silent reflection, he continued, "My principal interest lies in those domains of psychology which orthodox science has not yet ventured to explore. Should you collaborate with me, you will witness some highly unusual phenomena. However, I require only that you maintain an open mind and a silent tongue." This I undertook to do, for despite an instinctive aversion to the man, there existed about him such a singular allure, such an aura of authority and intrepid research, that I resolved to grant him the benefit of the doubt and observe whither it might lead. His exceptionally stimulating personality, which seemed to tune my intellect to its highest pitch, led me to believe that he might prove a beneficial restorative for a man who had, for the time being, lost his grasp on existence. "Unless you have extensive packing to perform," he remarked, "I can convey you in my motor car to my estate. If you will accompany me to the garage, I shall drive to your quarters, retrieve your effects, and we shall arrive before nightfall." We proceeded at a considerable speed down the Portsmouth Road until we reached Thursday, whereupon, to my astonishment, my companion diverted our course to the right, guiding the large vehicle along a cart track across the heather. The ancient rites are still observed in this region. "The Catholic faith?" I inquired. "The Catholic faith, my dear sir, is a modern innovation. I was referring to the pagan worship. The local peasantry still retain fragments of the ancient ritual, believing that it secures them fortune, or some similar superstition. They possess no comprehension of its esoteric significance." He paused briefly, then turned to me and remarked with singular emphasis, "Have you ever considered what might result if a man possessing the requisite knowledge were to reconstruct that ritual?" I admitted that I had not. I was candidly far out of my depth, yet he had undeniably brought me to the most unchristian locale I had ever visited. His sanatorium, however, stood in delightful contrast to the wild and desolate terrain that environed it. The garden was a profusion of color, and the residence, ancient, rambling, and mantled in creepers, was as enchanting within as it was without. It evoked suggestions of the Orient, it recalled the Renaissance, yet it possessed no distinct architectural style save for its rich, warm hues and profound comfort. I soon established myself in my duties, which I found exceedingly interesting. As I have previously stated, Taverner's work commenced where orthodox medicine reached its limit, and I had under my care cases of a nature that an ordinary practitioner would have committed to the custody of an asylum, deeming them nothing short of insane. Yet Taverner, through his idiosyncratic methods of investigation, laid bare causes operating both within the soul and within that shadowy realm where the soul resides, revelations that cast an entirely new light upon the problem, and frequently enabled him to rescue an individual from the dark influences closing in around him. The episode concerning the slaughtered sheep served as an intriguing illustration of his methods. One showery afternoon at the nursing home, we received a visit from a neighbor, an occurrence of some rarity, given that Taverner and his unorthodox practices were regarded with a degree of suspicion. Our visitor discarded her dripping mackintosh, yet declined to loosen the scarf which, despite the warmth of the day, she had wound tightly about her neck. "I understand that you specialize in psychological disorders," she remarked to my colleague. "I should greatly appreciate the opportunity to discuss a matter that is causing me considerable distress." Taverner nodded, his piercing gaze scrutinizing her for diagnostic indications. "It concerns a friend of mine, indeed, I believe I may still refer to him as my fiancé, for although he has requested that I release him from our betrothal, I have declined to do so. This is not out of a desire to bind a man whose affections have cooled, but rather because I am convinced that his feelings for me remain unchanged, and that some unrevealed obstacle has interposed itself between us. I have implored him to be candid and to allow us to confront this adversity together, for an obstacle that appears insuperable to him might not seem so to me. Yet one is well aware of how gentlemen conduct themselves when they believe their honor is at stake." She looked from one to the other of us, smiling faintly. No woman ever truly believes the men of her household have reached maturity. Perhaps she is correct. She then leaned forward, clasping her hands with earnestness. "I believe I have discovered the key to this mystery, and I wish to ascertain from you whether my hypothesis is plausible. Would you be so good as to provide the particulars?" Taverner requested. "We became engaged while Donald was stationed here during his military training, and the utmost harmony prevailed between us until his discharge from the army, at which point we all began to observe a marked alteration in his demeanor. He frequented our residence as regularly as before, yet he consistently appeared anxious to avoid being left alone in my company. We were accustomed to taking long walks across the moors together, but of late he has resolutely declined to do so. Subsequently, without any prior warning, he wrote to inform me that he could not marry me and did not wish to see me again. Moreover, he included a most singular injunction in his letter. He wrote, "Even should I come to you and entreat you to grant me an interview, I implore you not to accede to my request." My family surmised that he had become entangled with another young woman, and they were incensed by his desertion of me. However, I am convinced that a far deeper cause underlies his behavior. My letters to him remained unanswered, and I had resigned myself to the necessity of banishing the matter from my life, when he suddenly reappeared. Now, it is at this juncture that the affair assumes a highly peculiar character. One evening, We heard the poultry shrieking in terror, and assumed a fox was raiding the coop. My brothers set forth armed with golf clubs, and I accompanied them. Upon reaching the henhouse, we discovered several fowls with their throats lacerated as though by a rat. However, my brothers observed that the door of the structure had been forced open, an act of which no rodent would be capable. They surmised that a vagrant had attempted to steal the birds, and instructed me to return to the house. As I was retracing my steps through the shrubbery, an individual suddenly stepped into my path. The night was quite bright, the moon being nearly full, and I recognized Donald. He extended his arms and I went to him. But, instead of embracing me, he abruptly inclined his head and, "Look!" She withdrew the scarf from her neck, revealing a semicircle of small, bluish indentations upon the skin immediately beneath her ear, the unmistakable imprint of human dentition. "He was seeking the jugular," Taverner remarked. "It is fortunate indeed that he did not lacerate the skin." I cried out to him, "Donald, what are you doing?" My voice appeared to recall him to his senses. He released me and fled precipitately through the undergrowth. My brothers pursued him but failed to apprehend him, and we have not beheld him since. "I presume you have notified the authorities?" Taverner inquired. My father informed them that an attempt had been made to rob the hen roost, but they remain ignorant of the perpetrator's identity. You see, I refrained from disclosing that I had encountered Donald. "And yet you traverse the moors alone, fully aware that he may be lurking in the vicinity?" She nodded. "I would strongly advise against such excursions, Miss Winter. The gentleman is in all probability exceedingly dangerous, particularly to yourself. We shall arrange for our motor car to convey you home." "Do you believe he has lost his reason?" "That is precisely my opinion. I suspect he was conscious of his impending insanity, and that this prompted him to terminate our betrothal. Dr. Taverner, is there nothing that can be done on his behalf? It appears to me that Donald's affliction is not of an ordinary nature. We once employed a housemaid who lost her reason, and her entire personality seemed engulfed by madness, if you understand what I mean. But in Donald's case, it appears as though only a fraction of his being is deranged, as if his insanity existed externally to himself. Can you comprehend my meaning? It appears to me that you have provided an exceptionally lucid description of a case of psychic interference, what was termed in biblical times as demoniacal possession, Taverner observed. Can you offer him any assistance? The young woman inquired eagerly. I may be able to render considerable aid, provided you can persuade him to consult me. Upon our next attendance at the Harley Street consulting room, we discovered that the butler had recorded an appointment for a Captain Donald Craigie. We found him to be a gentleman of singular charm, one of those highly strung, imaginative temperaments possessing the latent qualities of an artist. In his customary state, he must have been an enchanting companion. Yet, as he sat opposite us at the consulting room desk, he was visibly a man under a profound shadow. I might as well make a full confession of the matter, he stated. I presume Beryl informed you regarding their poultry? She informed us that you attempted to bite her. Did she likewise disclose that I bit the chickens? Regrettably, I did so. A brief silence ensued. Then Taverner broke the quiet. When did this affliction first manifest itself? Following my experience of shell shock. I was thrown violently from a trench by an explosion, which left me severely shaken. I believed at the time that I had escaped with minor consequences, as my hospitalization lasted a mere 10 days. But I suppose this is the subsequent manifestation. Are you an individual who harbors an innate aversion to blood? Not particularly. While it was distasteful to me, I was capable of tolerating it. We were compelled to accustom ourselves to it in the trenches. Someone was invariably wounded, even during the most tranquil periods. And killed, Taverner added. Yes, and killed, our patient agreed. Thus, you developed a craving for blood? That is precisely the case. In the form of rare meats and similar food, I presume? No, that provides no satisfaction. It is a dreadful confession to make, but it is fresh blood that entices me, blood flowing directly from the veins of my victim. Ah, said Taverner, that alters the character of your case entirely. I should not have imagined it could be any darker, Craigie murmured. On the contrary, your disclosure renders the prognosis far more encouraging. You suffer not so much from a lust for blood, which might well be a manifestation of the subconscious mind, but rather from a hunger for vitality, which is an entirely different phenomenon. Craigie looked up swiftly. That is precisely the case. I have hitherto been unable to articulate it, but you have diagnosed the matter with absolute accuracy. I perceived that my colleague's perspicacity had inspired great confidence in him. I should like you to reside at my nursing home for a period, where you may remain under my personal observation, Taverner proposed. I should be very glad to do so, yet I believe there is a further circumstance of which you must be apprised before I consent. I feared that I might lose my self-control and attack Beryl. Ultimately, as events transpired, I did so. Thus, my precautions proved of little avail. Indeed, I believe it resulted in more harm than benefit, for I appeared to enter into a far closer rapport with this influence once I had capitulated to the impulse. I am well aware that the most prudent course of action available to me would be to end my own life, yet I lack the necessary courage, he confessed. I harbor a persistent apprehension that, following my demise, I should be compelled to confront this entity, whatever its nature, face to face. You need harbor no apprehension regarding your admission to the sanatorium. Taverner assured him, we shall care for you. Upon his departure, Taverner inquired of me, have you ever heard of vampires, Rhodes? Indeed, most certainly, I replied. I once utilized Dracula as a somnifacient during a bout of insomnia. That, he remarked, gesturing with his head toward the departing gentleman, is a singularly remarkable specimen. Do you mean to suggest that you intend to convey so repugnant a case to Hindhead? Not repugnant, Rhodes. Merely a soul confined within a dungeon. The soul in question may not be entirely wholesome, yet it remains a fellow creature. Liberate it, and it shall soon purify itself. I was frequently accustomed to marvel at the extraordinary tolerance and compassion Taverner exhibited toward erring humanity. The more intimately one observes human nature, he once remarked to me, the less one feels inclined to condemn it, for one realizes the magnitude of its struggles. No individual errs out of sheer preference, but rather because it presents itself as the lesser of two evils. A few days hence, I was summoned from the sanatorium office to admit a new patient. It was Craigie. He had advanced only as far as the threshold, where he remained utterly immobile. He appeared so profoundly abashed that I lacked the resolve to administer the judicious coercion typically employed under such circumstances. "I feel as though I were urging a balking horse," he confessed. "I desire to enter, yet I find myself unable to do so." I summoned Taverner, whose very appearance seemed to alleviate our patient's distress. "Ah," he murmured, "you inspire confidence in me. I feel capable of defying it." Whereupon he squared his shoulders and crossed the threshold. Once within, a significant burden seemed lifted from his mind, and he acclimated himself quite contentedly to the routine of the establishment. Beryl Winter was accustomed to walk over almost every afternoon, unbeknownst to her family, to elevate his spirits. Indeed, he appeared to be well on the path to recovery. One morning, while strolling about the grounds with the head gardener to plan certain minor improvements, he made an observation which I subsequently had cause to recall. "One would assume that all the German prisoners of war would have been repatriated by this time, would one not, sir? Yet they have not. I encountered one the other evening in the lane just beyond the rear entrance. I never anticipated that I should behold their detestable field gray uniform again." I sympathized with his animosity, for he had endured captivity at their hands, and such memories do not readily fade. I dismissed his remark from my thoughts, yet a few days later I was reminded of it when one of our patients approached me, saying, "Dr. Rhodes, I consider it exceedingly unpatriotic of you to employ German prisoners in the garden when so many demobilized soldiers are unable to secure employment." I assured her that we did no such thing, as no German was likely to survive a single day's labor under the supervision of our head gardener, himself a former prisoner of war. Nevertheless, I distinctly observed the man patrolling the greenhouses at closing time last night, she insisted. I recognized him by his flat cap and gray uniform. I reported this occurrence to Taverner. "Instruct Craigie that he is under no circumstances to venture out after sunset," he directed, "and advise Miss Winter that she would do well to remain away for the time being." A night or two later, as I was walking through the grounds enjoying an after-dinner cigarette, I encountered Craigie hastening through the shrubbery. "You shall have Dr. Taverner pursuing you," I called after him. "I missed the post-bag," he replied, "and I am proceeding to the pillar box." On the following evening, I again discovered Craigie in the grounds after nightfall, whereupon I intercepted him. "See here, Craigie," I remonstrated, "if you reside in this establishment, you must abide by its regulations, and Dr. Taverner requires you to remain indoors after sunset." Craigie bared his teeth and snarled at me in the manner of a dog. I seized him by the arm, escorted him back into the house, and reported the incident to Taverner. "The entity has re-established its influence over him," Taverner observed. "Evidently, we cannot starve it out of existence by keeping it apart from him. We must resort to other methods." "Where is Craigie at this moment?" "He is playing the piano in the drawing room," I replied. "Then we shall proceed to his chamber and unseal it." As I followed Taverner upstairs, he inquired of me, "Did it ever occur to you to wonder why Craigie hesitated so at the threshold?" "I gave it little thought," I answered. "Such behavior is common enough among psychiatric cases. There exists a sphere of influence, a species of psychic bell jar, as it were, over this house to exclude malevolent entities. What might, in vulgar parlance, be termed a spell. Craigie's familiar was unable to enter, and was loath to be left behind. I had hoped we might exhaust it by keeping Craigie removed from its influence, but it has established too powerful a dominion over him, and he deliberately cooperates with it. Evil communications corrupt good manners, and one cannot associate with such an entity without becoming tainted, particularly if one possesses a sensitive Celtic temperament like Craigie's. Upon reaching the room, Taverner approached the window and passed his hand across the sill, as though brushing something aside. "There," he said. "It may now enter to retrieve him, and we shall observe its actions." At the doorway he paused once more and inscribed a sign upon the lintel. "I do not believe it will bypass that," he remarked. Upon my return to the office, I found the village constable awaiting an audience with me. "I should be grateful if you would keep a watchful eye upon your dog, sir," he said. "We have received complaints of sheep killing of late, and whichever animal is responsible appears to be operating within a 3-mile radius, with this establishment as its center." "Our dog is an Airedale," I replied. "I should think it highly improbable that he is the culprit. It is typically collies that resort to sheep killing." At 11 o'clock, we extinguished the lights and retired our patients to their respective chambers. At Taverner's request, I changed into an old suit and rubber-soled tennis shoes, subsequently joining him in the smoking room, which was situated directly beneath Craigie's bedroom. We sat in the darkness, awaiting developments. "I do not require you to take action," Taverner instructed, "but merely to follow and observe what transpires." We did not have long to wait. Within approximately a quarter of an hour, we detected a rustling amongst the creepers, and Craigie descended hand over hand, swinging himself down by the substantial vines of wisteria that covered the wall. As he vanished into the shrubbery, I slipped out after him, maintaining my position within the shadow of the house. He proceeded at a stealthy, canine trot over the heather paths toward Frensham. Initially, I ran and crouched, taking advantage of every patch of shadow, but I presently perceived that such caution was superfluous. Craigie was utterly absorbed in his own purposes, whereupon I closed the distance, following him at an interval of some 60 yards. He moved at a vigorous pace, a loping trot that brought to mind the gait of a bloodhound. The vast, desolate expanses of that forsaken countryside stretched out on either side of us, while ribbons of mist filled the hollows, and the heights of Hindhead stood silhouetted against the stars. I felt no apprehension. Individually, I deemed myself a match for Craigie, and furthermore I was armed with what is technically termed a soother, 2 feet of lead gas piping encased within a length of rubber hose. While not included in the official equipment of the most reputable asylums, it may frequently be found concealed within an orderly's trouser leg. Had I been aware of the nature of the entity I was to confront, I should not have placed such reliance upon my weapon. Ignorance is occasionally an excellent substitute for courage. Suddenly, a sheep arose from the heather ahead of us, and the pursuit commenced. Craigie dashed forward in pursuit, and the terrified wether fled before him. A sheep can move with remarkable velocity over a short distance, but the poor, wool-encumbered beast was unable to maintain the pace, and Craigie ran it to ground, pursuing it in gradually diminishing circles. The creature stumbled, sank to its knees, and he fell upon it. He forced its head backward. Whether he employed a blade I could not discern, for a cloud obscured the moon, yet, dimly luminous within the shadow, I perceived a semi-transparent entity passing between myself and the dark, struggling mass amidst the heather. Once the moon emerged from the clouds, I distinguished the flat-topped cap and field-gray uniform of the German army. It is impossible for me to convey the sickening horror of that spectacle. A creature that was not a man assisting a man who, at that moment, was bereft of his humanity. Gradually, the sheep's struggles subsided and ceased altogether. Craigie straightened his posture and arose, whereupon he set off at his steady, loping gait toward the east, his gray familiar following closely at his heels. In what manner I achieved the journey home, I cannot tell. I did not dare look behind me, lest I should discover a presence at my elbow. Every breath of wind that swept across the heather felt like frigid fingers clasping my throat. Fir trees extended long limbs to grasp me as I passed beneath them, and heather bushes seemed to rise and assume human forms. I moved like a runner trapped in a nightmare, exerting prodigious effort toward an ever-receding goal. At last, I dashed across the moonlit lawns of the estate. Heedless of whoever might be observing from the windows, burst into the smoking room, and flung myself face downward upon the sofa. "Tut, tut," said Taverner. "Has it been as dreadful as all that?" I was unable to relate what I had witnessed, yet he appeared to comprehend. "Which way did Craigie proceed after he departed from you?" he inquired. "Toward the moonrise," I informed him. "And you were en route to Frensham?" "He is heading for the Winter's house. This is exceedingly grave roads. We must pursue him. It may already be too late. Do you feel capable of accompanying me?" He administered a strong measure of brandy to me, and we proceeded to retrieve the automobile from the garage. In Taverner's presence I felt secure. I could well understand the confidence he inspired in his patients. Whatever that gray shadow might portend, I felt assured he could contend with it and that I would remain safe under his protection. We were not long in approaching our destination. "I believe we shall leave the vehicle here," said Taverner, turning into a grass-grown lane. "We must avoid alerting them if possible." We advanced cautiously across the dew-drenched grass into the paddock that bordered one side of the Winter's garden. It was separated from the lawn by a sunken fence, and we were able to command a view of the entire facade of the house and easily reach the terrace should we so desire. In the shadow of a rose pergola we paused. The grand clusters of blossoms, colorless in the moonlight, seemed a ghastly mockery of our grim errand. For some time we waited, and then a movement caught my attention. Out in the meadow behind us, something was advancing at a slow lope. It described a wide arc of which the house formed the focus and vanished into a small coppice on the left. It might have been my imagination, yet I believed I discerned a wisp of vapor at its heels. We remained where we stood, and presently he reappeared, this time describing a smaller circle, evidently closing in upon the house. The third time he reappeared more swiftly, and on this occasion he was positioned between us and the terrace. "Quick! Intercept him," whispered Taverner. "He will ascend the creepers on his next circuit." We scrambled up the sunken fence and dashed across the lawn. As we did so, the figure of a young woman appeared at one of the windows. It was Beryl Winter. Taverner, plainly visible in the moonlight, pressed his finger to his lips and beckoned her to descend. "I am about to undertake an exceedingly hazardous course of action," he whispered, "but she is a woman of courage, and if her fortitude does not fail, we shall succeed in our endeavor." In a few moments she slipped through a side door and joined us, a cloak thrown over her nightdress. Are you prepared to undertake an exceedingly unpleasant task? Taverner inquired of her. I can guarantee that you will remain entirely safe so long as you retain your composure, but should you lose your nerve, you will be in grave peril. Does it concern Donald? She inquired. It does, said Taverner. I hope to rid him of the entity that is overshadowing him and seeking to obsess him. I have beheld it, she said. It resembles a wisp of gray vapor hovering directly behind him. It possesses the most ghastly countenance you could conceive. It approached the window last night, merely the face, while Donald was circling the house repeatedly. What did you do? Asked Taverner. I did nothing. I feared that if he were discovered, he might be confined to an asylum, in which case we should have no prospect of restoring him to health. Taverner nodded. Perfect love casteth out fear, he said. You are capable of performing that which is required of you. He positioned Miss Winter upon the terrace in the full brilliance of the moonlight. The moment Craigie perceives you, he instructed, retreat around the corner of the house into the yard. Rhodes and I shall await you there. A narrow doorway led from the terrace to the rear premises, and just within its archway Taverner bade me take my position. Pinion him as he passes you and hold fast for your very life, he said. Only take heed that he does not bite you, for these afflictions are transmissible. Scarcely had we taken up our positions when we heard the loping tread approach once more, this time upon the terrace itself. Evidently he caught sight of Miss Winter, for the stealthy, padding footsteps changed to a wild rush across the gravel, and the young woman slipped swiftly through the archway to seek refuge behind Taverner. Immediately upon her heels came Craigie. Another yard and he would have seized her, but I caught him by the elbows and pinioned him securely. For a moment we swayed and struggled across the dew-drenched flagstones, but I locked him in an old wrestling grip and held him fast. Now, said Taverner, if you will maintain your hold on Craigie, I shall deal with the other. Yet first we must sever it from him. Otherwise it will retreat back into him, and he may perish from the shock. Now, Miss Winter, are you prepared to perform your role? I am prepared to do whatever is required, she replied. Taverner extracted a scalpel from a pocket case and made a small incision in the skin of her neck, just beneath the ear. A drop of blood slowly accumulated, appearing black in the moonlight. That is the bait, he said. Now approach Craigie closely and entice the creature away. Induce it to follow you, and draw it forth into the open. As she approached us, Craigie plunged and struggled in my grasp like a wild beast, and then something gray and shadowy emerged from the gloom of the wall and hovered for an instant at my elbow. Miss Winter drew nearer, walking almost into its path. Do not approach too closely, cried Taverner, and she paused. Then the gray shape seemed to resolve itself. It drew clear of Craigie and advanced toward her. She retreated toward Taverner, and the thing emerged into the moonlight. We could discern it quite clearly, from its flat-topped cap to its knee boots. Its prominent cheekbones and narrow eyes indicated its origin to be the southeastern corner of Europe, where anomalous tribes still defy civilization and maintain their even stranger beliefs. The shadowy form drifted onward, following the girl across the yard, and when it was some 20 feet distant from Craigie, Taverner stepped out swiftly behind it, cutting off its retreat. It turned in an instant, immediately conscious of his presence, and there ensued a game of puss in the corner. Taverner was attempting to drive it into a species of psychic killing pen he had constructed for its reception. Although invisible to me, the lines of psychic force that bounded it were evidently quite perceptible to the creature we were pursuing. Hither and thither it glided in its efforts to escape, yet Taverner continuously herded it toward the apex of the invisible triangle, where he might deliver the finishing blow. Then the end arrived. Taverner leaped forward. There was a sign, then a sound. The gray form commenced to spin like a top. Faster and faster it revolved, its outlines merging into a whirling spiral of mist, and then it dissolved. Out into space dispersed the particles that had composed its form, and with the near-soundless shriek of supreme velocity, the soul departed to its appointed place. Then a great weight seemed to lift. From a frigid abyss of boundless terror, the flagged space resumed its ordinary aspect. The trees ceased to loom as tentacled menaces, the obscurity of the wall was no longer an ambuscade, and I knew with certainty that never again would a gray shadow drift out of the darkness upon its ghastly quest. I released Craigie, who collapsed inertly at my feet. Miss Winter departed to awaken her father, while Taverner and I conveyed the unconscious man into the residence. What masterful fabrications Taverner related to the family I have never ascertained, but some 2 months subsequent we received, in lieu of the customary fragment of wedding cake, a remarkably substantial portion, accompanied by a missive from the bride instructing us to deposit it in the office cupboard, where she knew we maintained provisions for those nocturnal repasts necessitated by Taverner's singular habits. It was during one of these midnight collations that I interrogated Taverner regarding the extraordinary affair of Craigie and his familiar. For a prolonged period, I had been unable to broach the subject, as the recollection of that gruesome slaughter of sheep was an event too dreadful to recall. "You have doubtless heard of vampires," remarked Taverner. "That was a classic manifestation. For nearly a century they have been virtually unknown in Europe, specifically Western Europe, yet the war has precipitated a resurgence, and a considerable number of instances have been documented. When they were first detected, that is to say, when some unfortunate youth was apprehended in the act of assaulting the wounded, he was escorted behind the lines and executed by firing squad. This, however, is a most unsatisfactory method of disposing of a vampire, unless one also takes the precaution of incinerating the corpse, in accordance with the venerable practices historically employed against practitioners of the dark arts. Subsequently, our enlightened generation concluded that they were confronting not a transgression, but a pathology, and confined the unfortunate individual afflicted with this dreadful obsession to an asylum. There, he typically did not long survive, as the supply of his singular sustenance was discontinued. Yet it occurred to no one that they might be contending with more than a single factor, that what they actually confronted was a macabre alliance between the deceased and the living. "What precisely do you mean?" I inquired. "We possess 2 physical bodies, you must understand," Taverner explained, "the dense material vessel with which we are all acquainted, and the subtle etheric counterpart that inhabits it, serving as the medium for the vital forces, whose operations would elucidate a vast number of phenomena, were science but to condescend to investigate them. Upon a man's demise, the etheric body, containing his soul, detaches from the physical form and hovers in its vicinity for approximately 3 days, or until decomposition commences. Thereupon, the soul departs from the etheric body as well, which subsequently perishes, and the individual enters the initial stage of his post-mortem existence, the purgatorial phase. Now, it is possible to preserve the cohesion of the etheric body almost indefinitely if a source of vitality is accessible. However, lacking an alimentary system to digest food and transmute it into energy, The entity is compelled to prey upon someone who possesses one, thereby developing into the spiritual parasite we designate a vampire. There exists a considerable practical knowledge of the dark arts in Eastern Europe. Suppose, then, that an individual possessing this knowledge is slain. He is aware that in 3 days' time, upon the dissolution of his etheric body, he must face his ultimate reckoning. Given his transgressions, he naturally wishes to avoid this fate. Consequently, he establishes a connection with the subconscious mind of another soul that still retains a physical form, provided he can locate a subject suitable for his designs. An individual of highly assertive character is of no utility. He must discover one of a passive disposition, such as is afforded by mediums of a lower order. Hence, this constitutes one of the manifold perils of mediumship for the untrained practitioner. Such a passive condition may be temporarily induced by, for example, shell shock, whereupon it becomes possible for the discarnate soul under consideration to exert an influence over a being of a far superior type, such as Craigie, and employ him as an instrument for its own gratification. But why did the creature not confine its attentions solely to Craigie, rather than compelling him to assault others? Because, had it done so, Craigie would have perished within a week, thereby depriving the entity of its human source of nourishment. Instead, it operated through Craigie, inducing him to extract auxiliary vitality from others and transmit it to itself. Hence, Craigie suffered from a hunger for vitality rather than a craving for blood, though the fresh blood of a victim served as the medium through which that vitality was absorbed. Then that German whom we all beheld was merely a corpse that was insufficiently deceased. Chapter 2. The Return of the Ritual. It was Taverner's custom, at specific times and seasons, to induce in himself a state resembling hypnosis. He, however, termed this process entering the subconscious, and asserted that, by means of concentration, he shifted the focus of his attention from the external world to the realm of thought. Of the various states of consciousness to which he thus gained access, and of the work that could be accomplished in each, he would discourse for hours, and I soon learned to recognize the distinct phases he traversed during this extraordinary process. Night after night, I kept vigil beside the insensible form of my colleague as it lay twitching upon the sofa, while thoughts not originating from his own mind influenced his passive nervous system. Though many individuals can communicate with one another by means of thought, I had never fully comprehended the extent to which this faculty was utilized until I witnessed Taverner employing his own body as the receiving instrument for such telepathic messages. One evening, while he was consuming some hot coffee I had provided, he remarked to me, "Rhodes, there is a most singular affair afoot." I inquired as to his meaning. "I am not entirely certain," he replied. "There is an occurrence transpiring which I do not fully comprehend, and I desire your assistance in investigating it." I pledged my assistance and inquired as to the nature of the problem. "I informed you when you joined my endeavors," he said, "that I was a member of an occult fraternity. However, I did not disclose any details concerning it, as I am bound by an oath of secrecy. Nevertheless, for the purpose of our mutual collaboration, I intend to exercise my discretion and explain certain matters to you. You are doubtless aware that we employ ritual in our work. This is by no means the absurdity you might deem it, for ritual exerts a profound influence upon the human mind. Any individual possessing sufficient sensitivity can perceive the vibrations radiating whenever an occult ceremonial is enacted. For instance, I need only attune my mind for a brief moment to discern whether one of the Lhasa lodges is executing its formidable ritual. While I was in the subconscious state moments ago, I perceived one of the rituals of my own order being performed, yet executed in a manner that no lodge in which I have ever sat would tolerate. It resembled a composition by Tchaikovsky picked out upon a piano with a single finger by a child, and, unless I am egregiously mistaken, some unauthorized individual has obtained possession of that ritual and is experimenting with it. Someone has violated his oath and betrayed your secrets, I observed. Evidently, Taverner replied, such a betrayal is rare, yet instances have occurred. Should any of the Black Lodges, who would well understand how to utilize it, obtain this ritual, the consequences could be grave. For there exists immense power within these ancient ceremonies, and while that power remains secure in the hands of the meticulously selected candidates whom we initiate, it would be a vastly different matter in the possession of unprincipled men. Do you intend to trace its source? I inquired. Indeed, said Taverner, though that is more easily proposed than accomplished. I possess absolutely nothing to guide me. My only course of action is to disseminate inquiries among the lodges to ascertain whether a copy is absent from their archives, which will somewhat circumscribe our area of search. Whether Taverner utilized the postal service or resorted to his own singular methods of communication, I did not know. Nevertheless, within a few days, he had obtained the information he required. None of the scrupulously guarded rituals was absent from any of the lodges. However, when an investigation was conducted among the archives at headquarters, it was discovered that a ritual had been purloined from the Florentine lodge during the Middle Ages by the keeper of the archives and sold to the Medici. At all events, it was known to have been employed in Florence during the latter half of the 15th century. Its subsequent fate, following the dispersal of the Medicean manuscripts during the plundering of Florence by the French, remained entirely unknown. It had vanished from view and was presumed to have been destroyed. Now, however, after the passage of so many centuries, someone was reawakening its extraordinary power. As we proceeded down Harley Street a few days hence, Taverner inquired whether I would object to diverting our course into Marylebone Lane, where he wished to visit an antiquarian bookshop. I was astonished that a gentleman of my colleague's caliber should patronize such an establishment, for its inventory appeared to consist primarily of tattered, paper-bound volumes of Ouida and obsolete devotional tracts. Nevertheless, the alacrity with which the shop assistant hastened to summon the proprietor indicated that my companion was an esteemed and regular patron. The proprietor, upon his appearance, proved an even greater surprise than his establishment. Unbelievably dusty, his frock coat, beard, and countenance all seemed of a uniform gray-green hue. Yet, when he spoke, his voice was that of a cultivated gentleman, and, though my companion addressed him as an equal, he replied as though speaking to a superior. Have you received any response to the advertisement I requested you to insert on my behalf? Taverner inquired of the snuff-colored individual who confronted us. I have not, the man replied, but I have obtained some intelligence for you. You are not the sole prospective purchaser in the market for the manuscript. My competitor being? A man named Williams. That does not convey very much to us. The postmark was Chelsea, remarked the aged bookseller, casting a significant look. Ah! Exclaimed my employer. They possess sufficient familiarity to recognize a ritual upon encountering it, and are merely experimenting with it to observe the consequences. Presumably, none would be more astonished than they should any tangible result ensue. Were the ritual confined to such hands, I should not harbor any apprehension. However, it may fall into the possession of those who know how to wield it and abuse its powers, whereupon the consequences would be far more grave than you can possibly comprehend. I would even venture to assert that the very course of civilization would be affected should such an event transpire. I perceived that Taverner was profoundly moved. Heedless of the traffic, he plunged into the roadway, making directly. Do you want access to this and all the complete audiobooks on the channel, plus the ebook version? Click the link in the description or scan the QR code in the left corner of the screen to access our library, where you can listen to your favorite esoteric books without ad interruptions, lock your screen, or use other apps while the narration plays, and even download the ebook version to follow along as you listen. Listen on your computer via web browser, or download the app from the Play Store. After subscribing, you will receive an email with your login details, password, and step-by-step instructions on how to access the books through the Hotmart app.